Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, November 18th, 2015, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday. We have oodles to report on today, a lot of stuff to talk about. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, his hand hovering over the phone, ready to swoop on down and answer your call and put you on the air with your comments and questions here. Now, we are continuing to see more and more revelations that much of what we think we know about what happened in Paris is manufactured fakes. In fact, I have to tell you in all honesty, I've been flipping this egg timer over so many times, it finally got sick and puked its sand out all over the desk, so we're going to have to give it a funeral and get a replacement in here for the poor thing. You probably have seen there's this Facebook video was going viral all over, supposedly showing Muslims in London celebrating the Paris terror attacks. It is fake. It's titled, Muslims Around the World Celebrate the Islamic Victory in Paris, France. Shows this large group of Muslim men cheering and waving Pakistani flags outside Tooting Broadway Station in South London. Now, there's a voiceover of a newsreader describing how this are Muslims celebrating the attacks in Paris. However, it turns out the footage is actually of British Pakistanis celebrating a cricket victory during the 2020 games in 2009. So there's propaganda being put on out there to try and demonize all the Muslims, which is getting kind of weird for reasons I will make clear to you in the very near future. Now, as you heard on the news break, they're confirming that the accused mastermind of the Paris attacks, Abdelhamid Aboud, has been killed in that police raid on the St. Denis apartment. So now we can't actually find out from him who hired him, who paid him, or even if he really was the mastermind. You're the mastermind. Boom, you're dead. Case closed, they think. Now remember, the witnesses reported the attackers who attacked the cafe were clean-shaven white men in a brand new Mercedes-Benz. Got out very calmly. One of them described him as military bearing and started shooting into the crowd. Of course, they're going to be relaxed. They know nobody could shoot back. France has strict gun control. Now, as of right now, we're talking about the fake Syrian passport found near one of the supposed suicide bombers. The one that didn't even crack the glass in the front of the place where he set the bomb off. There have now been 8 migrants identified using that exact same fake passport number. It's a huge problem. The passports are very well made, nation-state quality. They think it may be Turkey, and they're all over the place, and your average border control person cannot tell the difference. Now, the other day we were reporting on how one of the accused suicide bombers, his ex-wife had been interviewed in the media, and she said he wasn't a fanatical Muslim. He never went to the mosque. He liked to get high. He was out of work. And he celebrated Ramadan only when he was pressured into doing it. Quite a conflict with the official story of fanatical Muslims who are going to suicide themselves and go off to see Allah and get their 47 raisins or whatever. The fact that he was unemployed makes me very concerned, because following the 7/7 tube bombing in London, the subway bombing, it came out, there was a drill going on at the exact same time and place, just as there was in Paris. A multi-site terror attack drill was going on. How lucky for us, because everything we needed was right there. And then it came out following the London bombing that somebody had gone into the Muslim neighborhood looking to hire, quote-unquote, actors to play the role of the villain in a terror drill. So they get somebody who's out of work and say, look, we're having this terror drill. We need somebody to play the terrorist. Here's your phony exploding vest. And just go into this restaurant, punch the button, everybody will have a good laugh, and we'll pay you after you get back safely. That's how you can create a phony suicide bomber or a patsy suicide bomber in the middle of a terror drill. So now we have another report. A friend of Salah Abdeslam is saying this guy was not a fanatic. He wasn't a hater. You know, he loved motorcycles. He was a storekeeper. That's what he did. It's just not lining up with this idea of fanatical Muslims. And by the way, for those of you watching on BAM Music TV, I got this package in the mail from a group called Christ's Royal Regiment. And in it is just some amazingly, appallingly bad attacks on gays and Islam, and it's pretty abysmal. And it underscores the fact that it isn't just Muslims who can be dangerously fanatical in their beliefs. Fanaticism and frenzy knows no boundaries and borders. All right, now here's the reality of what's going on. The 8 terror suspects named so far all have European Union passports. They're citizens of Belgium, France. Those are the 2 areas. And that sort of puts Francois Hollande in a bit of an awkward situation, because he's out there saying, well, look, the people who attacked Paris are all Europeans with European passports. The Syrian passports are all fakes. So there's no reason to block the Syrian refugees coming into your country, no reason at all. But because the fake passports were Syria, we're going to go in and we're going to bomb Syria into rubble and launch airstrikes. And we are now getting word from anti-ISIS groups inside Syria. The French airstrikes so far this week are not hitting ISIS. Admit it, you're not surprised. They've apparently taken out a sports stadium, a museum, several medical clinics, and a Syrian government building. They're back to the same old situation. Oh, trust us, we're fighting ISIS, and they're trying to bomb Syria to the point where Bashar al-Assad has to step down and be replaced by a puppet ruler. And we're seeing the after effect of this collision between the New World Order, let's blend everybody together and drop the borders agenda, and this desire to get back into Syria and confront Russia. The 2 are not lining up here. And that's how awkward it is. The identified Paris attackers were not refugees. And they're out there saying, see, they weren't refugees, so you shouldn't object to refugees coming into your country. Well, the problem with that is, if you're allowing refugees into your country, the terrorists are going to pose as refugees. It's inevitable. They're going to see it as the point of weakness that it really is. And I'm amazed that nobody is out there talking about the real permanent solution to the refugee crisis, which is to stop all the U.S. wars of conquest that are making these people refugees in the first place. Why does that not seem to occur to anybody in any of the evolved governments or the corporate media? It's absurd. All right, let's see. We're coming up on a commercial break. There's a caller on the line, but I'm going to leave you till after the commercial break here. Now, there's a new development. Remember that recording that came out where ISIS is taking credit for the Paris attack? Linguistic analysis has revealed that the voice is Canadian. That's a Canadian who made that recording. So we have to bomb Canada, which is the plot of Canadian Bacon and a South Park episode. We're going to have war on Canada. We've got Canadian ISIS. We have to go make war on them. It really is absurd in the extreme. But this whole thing has fallen apart. And they're caught between this, needing the attackers to be Syrian to justify escalating the war in Syria, and then turning around and saying, no, they weren't Syrian. Don't object to Syrian refugees coming into your country. They've really painted themselves into a corner on this one. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, earlier this year, following the false flag at Charlie Hebdo, France actually tried to pass legislation to make conspiracy theories illegal. You will listen only to the official story. If you have a different point of view, you will go to jail. Remember, truth needs no law to support it. Only lies and liars resort to the courts to get people to go along with imposed dogma. Now, in response to Paris, the European Union has just passed strict controls to make it difficult to acquire firearms for everybody living in Europe. Small problem with that. France already had strict gun control, which is why none of the victims of the terror attack, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, could shoot back. And those strict French gun control laws did not prevent the terrorists, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, from acquiring military weapons. Remember the witness statements about 3-round bursts of fire? That's not a feature supported in the Kalashnikov. It's found on the M16 and its variants, which are military weapons ordinary civilians cannot buy anyway. Earlier today, the French prosecutor was saying whoever did this had professional logistical support. It's not just a bunch of people who got upset and said we're going to commit an act of terror. They had the support of nation-state quality hackers to paralyze the French security services computer. This is obviously state-sponsored terror. And when you have state-sponsored terrorists, they're going to have all the guns they want. Only the victims will be disarmed. All right, let's grab ourselves a couple of phone calls here. Brian in Pennsylvania, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right, I was just at my local shooting club on Monday, and that was what everybody was talking about, was the Paris attack and all that crap. And everybody was saying, maybe I should go. Everybody was talking about going and buying more guns.
Good
and
for
it's
them.
like, and what I don't get is that the Democrats want to take our guns away from us, but yet the government can't stop all these like ISIS attacks that are their attacks, but they can't stop their shit. Why can't they stop so they could try to make it look like, we're going to try to take the guns away from us, you know?
Well, I mean, that's always been the agenda. I mean, Obama has said that his top priority in his last year of office is going to be gun control on the American citizen. This from the same government that's been giving military-style weapons to Mexican drug cartels through that Fast and Furious program. The tyrants running the place will not sleep soundly in their bed at night until we, the people, are completely helpless and disarmed. That's the goal. And they'll send out however many...
They're not going to get it.
Well, I certainly hope not, because, every genocide of the 20th century was preceded by a gun ban on the targeted population. And these people who are carrying out these false flag acts of terror, they're going to have all the guns they need. Remember Iran-Contra? Okay, the guns being smuggled down in exchange for all that cocaine were being manufactured for the purpose. They were manufactured without serial numbers. It's not like somebody went to the gun store and bought these guns and sent them to the Contras. They literally set up their own factories to build these guns. Anybody who knows machining can build guns. The bad guys can build all the guns they want. All gun laws do is make us all victims to terrorists, criminals, and governments.
All right, thanks, Mike. I just wanted to let you know that at least here in my town, everybody's going crazy and buying more guns.
Well, good for them. The more guns you've got, the more nervous the government is going to be, and that's a good thing these days. We're going to switch over here to Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I don't know if you talked about this or not, but there's this guy who's talking about security experts who were forewarned.
Yeah.
The Jewish security experts were forewarned that the attack was going to happen. I was wondering if there's like a Israel connection.
Well, yeah, I certainly think so. Remember what happened on 9/11? Odaigo, an Israeli-owned company, had offices near the World Trade Towers. They got an advance warning before the planes even took off the ground. No Israelis who worked in the World Trade Towers bothered to show up that day. In fact, as far as I can tell, there was only one Jewish person who died at all, and he was just there, just happened to be visiting at the time.
Yeah, because if you remember, last year, Benjamin Netanyahu warned France that if they were to vote for the Palestinian state, that they would be it'll be a grave mistake for them to do so.
Yeah, no, everybody's been talking about that, and of course then Charlie Hebdo happened, and now the Paris attack has happened, and now Israel is angry at Sweden for saying, now's the time to identify with what Israel's doing to Palestine, so I'm sure Sweden's going to get a horrible ISIS terror attack. Netanyahu's angry with Spain over those arrest warrants, so I think that we can count on Spain getting an ISIS terror attack. And now the United Nations is telling Israel, that they refused to recognize Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. So now we can expect ISIS to attack the United Nations building in New York City.
Yeah, I heard as well. I forgot the name of that building that had the concert in. But supposedly there was a Jewish guy who owned the building and sold it months before.
They'd owned it for something like 40 years, and they sold it about a month before this whole thing happened.
It's eerily reminiscent to what happened 9/11, really is.
Yeah, it is. A huge amounts of parallels going on.
Okay, I just wanted to bring it to your attention. I wasn't sure if you discussed it or not.
Oh, yeah, we had mentioned it very much here. Thank you for the phone call, and we're going to switch to John in Barbados. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yes, what I'm getting and all the indications and what have you, this looks like an operation from that small nation at the eastern end of the Mediterranean, if you get my drift.
What, Lebanon?
A bit further south than that.
Okay. Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about, but we're never supposed to talk about them.
But what I really wanted to talk about was Syria.
Yes.
These massive Russian bombing raids in Raqqa and what have you. Apparently, the ISIS members are evacuating. And as they're evacuating, their convoys are being targeted as well. And according to what I'm reading, they're getting ripped to pieces.
Well, you know, Russia's now coordinating with the West, and it's very, very simple what's going on. Russia is actually bombing ISIS, and the West is bombing everything else.
Well, apparently so. The French have not hit anything of any ISIS significance, but the Russians are...
No, they're hitting medical clinics, museums, stadiums. That's not war on ISIS, that's war on Syria. And they actually think we don't see what's going on, the depths of the deception and depravity going on. Anyway, John, we're coming up on a commercial break. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to let you go. And we will be right back after these words from our sponsors. Forgot to put up my master pan here. Welcome back to the show here. Now, you need to understand, because of these two conflicting agendas, blur everybody together, drop the borders, and let's find a reason to get back into Syria and bomb Assad out of power. They've run headlong into each other over the question of the Syrian refugees. And look at it from France's point of view. They're in Syria right now bombing stadiums, museums, medical clinics, things like that, because supposedly Syrian ISIS carried out the Paris terror attacks, except that now we know that all the named suspects are not Syrian, they're European. And the Syrian passport that was found next to the remains of a suicide bomber, who was probably very surprised to find out he really was wearing a live bomb. That's the reason for going into Syria and bombing the place. At the same time, they're trying to tell us there's no problem with Syrian refugees coming in. You shouldn't worry about it at all. And you can see what a corner they painted themselves into. And now they're looking for a new handle to keep this going. And John Kerry, earlier today, has said the Paris attacks are a rallying point for the entire world. And he's trying to compare the fight against ISIS to World War II, the fight against the Nazis. He even brought up the Holocaust. I mean, the propaganda is getting desperate. And you wonder why people are throwing up their hands and saying, this is just utter nonsense. I have a neighbor who's a police officer. And they were saying, none of this makes any sense at all coming out of the U.S. government or the corporate media. Now then, Air France flight AF-55 had to be diverted to Halifax on a false alert bomb threat. And actually, there were two Air France planes. One was diverted to Halifax, the other one to Salt Lake City. And they searched the planes. There were no bombs. Now, these bomb threats were received by telephone, so here is the perfect opportunity for the National Security Agency to prove that saving telephone metadata can find the bad people. Let's see the NSA identify who made these hoax bomb threats. We're waiting. We're still waiting. Hello? Anybody there? Hello? Hello? No, guess not. Now, Germany's top security official, who's now out there trying to re-justify Germany's refugee policy, open borders, has come up with the idea that this fake Syrian passport was planted at the scene of the suicide bombing in order to make Europeans fearful of refugees, and you don't want to fall for this false flag here and start hating all those poor, suffering refugees. And again, the real solution to the refugee crisis is to stop all these U.S. wars of conquest that are making these people refugees. Nobody seems to want to mention that. It doesn't serve the agenda of the elites of blending the world together into a single population who doesn't know who they are to make them pliant workers. And, of course, going after Russia and China because they refuse to play the game the way the United States wants them to do. Germany's interior minister is saying ISIS may be planning a new terror attacks in Europe. Yeah, they may be planning to buy a car. They may be planning to open a bakery. They may be doing anything. This is a non-story. They're out there trying to fan the fear of ISIS, 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 ISIS. Now, Sweden has raised their terror threat level to the second highest level over concrete information that there is a coming ISIS terror attack to Sweden, which is very likely because Israel is still unhappy with Sweden over that comment linking the Paris attacks to Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. And remember, if you say something Israel doesn't like, the terrorists are going to get you. Israel has formally complained. They even called in the ambassador over this comment, basically saying, the actual quote was, once again, we return to situations like that in the Middle East, especially Palestinians who think there is no future for us. We must accept a desperate situation or resort to violence, which is that's an accurate statement to make. When you take away all people's hope and show them they have no future other than that being spoon-fed to them by the ruling power, yeah. And Israel's very upset about that. No, you're not supposed to be sympathetic to the Palestinians. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You are only sympathetic to Israel. And Netanyahu is actually out there trying to draw the world's sympathy away from Paris and back onto Israel. It's shameless. Absolutely shameless. All right, story over in the Daily Sheeple. Once again, and we've already heard this, the French government knew that a terror attack was imminent. Didn't issue any warnings, didn't say anything, didn't do anything. We just put up an article over at WhatReallyHappened.com where the ex-head of the CIA is saying, yeah, of course Bush and Cheney knew 9/11 was coming. We told them. Now, Syria's Assad is still out there trying to make a point. What happened in Paris was terrible, no question. But that's what Syria has endured for the last 5 years. Paris was one day, one incident. Syria, the Syrian people, have had to live with the possibility that any day there could be a giant explosion right in front of them and everybody they know and love is blown to bloody bits, courtesy of the United States of America. But we're not supposed to care about them. We're only supposed to care about the French people, the good guys. Now, the former British military chief, General David Richards, is basically standing up to the Western agenda and saying if you really want to defeat ISIS in Syria, you've got to let Assad stay in the presidency. And, of course, I'm sure he's going to get a very irate phone call from David Cameron saying, we're not really fighting ISIS. We're trying to get Assad out. Stop rocking the boat. Now, David Cameron is saying he's about to launch airstrikes on ISIS in Syria even without United Nations authorization. The same war crime currently being committed by the United States of America. Because absent a formal congressional declaration of war, and absent a resolution from the United Nations Security Council, this intrusion into Syria is a war crime. It's illegal. It's illegitimate. It's a violation of international law and the UN Charter. Now, France has gone back to the founding document of the European Union and invoked the Mutual Defense Clause, Article 42.7 of the Treaty on European Union, which obligates all the member nations of the European Union to go whoop on France's enemies. But there's a small problem there. Even France is now admitting the people who carried out the terror attack are Europeans. What are they going to do, bomb each other? The propaganda has really written itself into a horrible, horrible hole. It wasn't Syria, don't block the Syrian refugees. The attackers in Paris were all Europeans, so let's go make war on Syria. It doesn't make any sense. There's no way it can make any sense. Not without a case of scotch, which I'm sure there's probably a shortage of in Washington, D.C. right now. Now, the New York Times has actually decided to show a little bit of spine, and they have an editorial that is denouncing the CIA's exploitation of the Paris attacks in the rush to reassert total spying on all the American people. Because we know nothing stops terror faster than spying on law-abiding citizens. The editorial calls the CIA's waving of the French bloody shirts a new and disgraceful low. But hey, that's what the Cocaine Importation Agency does. We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here, continuing on with the news here. Now, here in the United States of America, again because of what happened in Paris, a Republican senator from Arkansas has submitted a bill to Congress that would extend the NSA's ability to collect Americans' phone information by more than a year. Because nothing is going to fight terrorism better than spying on the law-abiding citizen. Now remember, these attackers in Paris had the resources of a nation-state behind them. They had hackers paralyzing the computer system of the security services. They had military-style weapons, and we may therefore presume they had military-style radio communication. Encrypted frequency-agile radios. They're not using cell phones and social media. The NSA is looking in the wrong place if fighting terror is their real agenda. Of course, if their real agenda is control over the American people, scaring us into silence, stealing our business secrets, and making sure we're not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts, then yeah, of course they're going to go on spying on you. Just like the Gestapo spied on the German people. Washington, D.C. is following Dictatorship for Dummies by Adolf Hitler. They've hit pretty much every one of those issues. Targeted minority to be demonized. For the Nazis, it was the Jews. For today, it's the Muslims. Concentration camps. Use of torture. Spying on everybody. False flags. Lies. The U.S. has become the Fourth Reich. We are hearing advocates who are out there saying that scapegoating Edward Snowden for Paris is irrational, and they're concerned that this Paris situation is going to intensify the war on private encryption. Because the government doesn't feel comfortable unless they know everything you're doing. Of course, when we try and ask the government, what are you up to? It's national security. You're not allowed to know that. We, the gods in Washington, D.C., we're allowed to have secrets, don't you know? But you workers, you serfs, you're not allowed to have secrets. It's bad for the country. That's what's going on over here. Now, Netanyahu has really gone off his nut. Came out with a statement earlier today in an interview with the Jerusalem Post diplomatic correspondent Herb Keenan. Netanyahu came out and said, we have to fight terrorism like we fought the Nazis. Netanyahu can simply not pass up a chance to remind the world that Israel is always the victim, even when the attacks are in other countries. And by the way, Israel didn't fight the Nazis. Just a little point of historical clarification. And as a matter of fact, the Jewish people in Germany didn't fight the Nazis. They hunkered down and whined and cried and waited for somebody else to come save them. Which the rest of the world did. And Israel's been demanding money from us on that basis ever since, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now then, the historical reality is that Nazi Germany was actually on good terms with its Jewish population. We've put up that photo of this Nazi Jewish coin, which, by the way, mentions Palestine explicitly on the backside. And as it turns out, Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews. He wanted to give them Madagascar. But the Zionists said no, must be Palestine or nothing. But it turns out there were a lot of Jewish people inside the Third Reich, inside the military, some of them, the high officers, with the explicit consent of Adolf Hitler. All told, it's estimated 150,000 Jewish people served in Hitler's military. So Netanyahu, please tell us again the rationale behind that comment, how we fought the Nazis. It's kind of bizarre. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Scott in Virginia, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, two things. One, the Paris attacks, how the media is just basically saying that these are terrorists, not alleged terrorists, but these people that are killed, they've already convicted them. They've already said they're terrorists. They've taken the government's word, a foreign government's word.
Yes.
That these people, and of course no one's making any mistakes. Isn't it amazing how these large police operations, spur of the moment, and the media is not reporting any mistakes by the police or government officials. Just seems like they do everything perfect.
Oh, well, that's what we're supposed to believe, that it's absolutely perfect, and, it was only a coincidence. There was a multi-site terror attack drill taking place at the exact same time and place as the actual attack. How lucky for us. I mean, that's actually what the French media is saying. How fortunate for us the terrorists struck right in the middle of an anti-terror drill. I don't know a lot about terrorists and how they think. The only terrorist I really know very well is Ahmed. But I can't imagine somebody planning a terrorist attack is going to show up and see everything already there. Police cars, tanks, and everything for the drill, and still go ahead with the green light. Just really doesn't make any sense.
How many times is the public going to allow this to happen before most of us catch on? Before we say, okay, this is just too much. Come on.
Most of us have caught on, and last weekend my wife and I hit a local flea market, and everybody was out there saying they didn't believe this Paris thing. It was real. It was another government hoax. A lot of people talking about 9/11. The question is, at what point will the American people simply stop listening to the government and the corporate media entirely and stop obeying? That's an open-ended question. Unfortunately, the government's got Sidney Milgram on their side. 60% of the human population will willingly inflict pain on total strangers as long as somebody that's an authority figure tells them it's okay.
That's what I'm fearful for. And what I can't believe on a different topic is how they can have two issues that are contrary to each other, like the release of Jonathan Pollard and at the same time wanting Snowden put to death for spying. They get away with it. I don't know how to get away with it.
Well, because their world is black and white. There's Israel and there's everybody else. Israel wants Jonathan Pollard. Okay, we must give Jonathan Pollard back to Israel. And it really is, and the good news is, of course, it's this inconsistency, this multiple standards that is undermining public trust in the government. Because the principle on which the United States was founded was a nation of laws that apply equally to everybody, from the guy picking up trash in the street all the way up to the White House. And every time the U.S. government displays a double standard about, we have to sympathize for the victims in Paris, but don't feel anything for all those innocent civilians the drones are killing, it destroys the trust of the American people in the government. I mean, the trust in the government is at an all-time low. The approval rating of Congress and the White House is at an all-time low. They're barely clinging on, and they're hoping a new world war is going to save them. They think if they can get the bombs really falling, that we, the American people, are going to forget all about the abuse, the corruption, the financial shenanigans, all the lies and deceptions, and we'll throw the flag a snappy salute and fling our babies onto the designated enemy's bayonets.
I hope it doesn't work out that way, but I'm afraid that they'll pull it off again. They've done it 3 times already.
Well, you know, the sad reality is that every government keeps going and grabbing and grabbing and going until they take that one step too far. And you can talk to like Charles I of England, Mussolini, Ceausescu, Louis XVI. They'll just take that one step too far where everybody says, oh, come on now. And the guillotines come out, the machine guns come out. You know, tyrannical rulers do fall. They are brought down. It's just a matter of when.
Well, I'm afraid that we're going to get blamed because we've gone into so many countries now over so many years that when our government eventually does topple and we lose our superpower status, that people are going to come at us for revenge, and they're going to say, well, why didn't you do something sooner? Kind of like the Germans and the Italians, how we kind of blame them for not toppling their dictators before we arrived to their shores.
Well, I don't think it was a question of revenge for not toppling the dictators. The reason for the German starvation camps that were run by Eisenhower was simply to reduce the German population and reduce their threat as an economic power challenging Britain and the United States of America. It's the reason all the factories were bombed over there. It was all about economics. Nations enslaved to private central banks cannot compete with nations not enslaved to private central banks. So the inevitable result is war on those nations, destroy their economy so that we are still number one in a race to the bottom of civilization. We'll be right back after our top of the hour news and these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Now, getting on back to Netanyahu. He absolutely cannot stand the world feeling sorrier for anybody except Israel. And he is absolutely shameless in doing this. Over at Mondo Weiss, they're reporting Netanyahu has made a statement that because of the Paris attacks, the world should condemn attacks against Israel. It's like, who cares about those Frenchmen? You've got to worry about Israel. Israelis are precious. Israelis are special. All the rest of them, who cares? Pay attention to me. Pay attention to me. And another article from the Jewish Week expressing the desire that the attacks on Paris will help build sympathy for Israel in dealing with the terrorist threat from Palestine. Remember what Netanyahu was quoted as saying after 9/11, that it was actually a good thing? Then he backed off and said, well, okay, it's not good. It's not good. It's not good. But it's going to build sympathy for Israel. That's all they care about. Feel sorry for us. Give us money. Give us weapons. Look the other way when we kill Palestinian children because they're going to grow up to be terrorists anyway. The complete lack of empathy by Netanyahu, both to the people who died in New York and those who died in Paris, is stunning. We don't care about you. You care about us. Your job is to care about us and take care of us. We don't have to care about you. That's the attitude that's fully on display from Netanyahu. Now, very interesting story. Got a lot of people scratching their heads. Where following the recent meetings on the Syrian crisis, Obama says Putin is a constructive partner in the Syria talks. And Obama said Russia had been, very constructive in trying to create a political transition following the talks in Austria. The translation is Russia's not going to budge from Syria. Obama is trying to save face about it. Because, in point of fact, the United States is not partnering with Russia in Syria. The Syrian government has invited Russia to come on in and help deal with the terrorists. The United States is not invited. And Obama is still trying to convince you, the American people, that he is basically calling the shots over Syria. And he isn't. He just absolutely isn't. Blacklisted News, another article, West leverages Paris attacks for Syria endgame. That's what this was all about. The U.S. was in there making war on Bashar al-Assad while telling you it was a war on ISIS. They accomplished nothing against ISIS for an entire year. Russia comes on in at the invitation of the Syrian government and accomplishes more in a month than the U.S. did in an entire year. And all of a sudden, Putin has upstaged Obama, and Obama can't stand that, and he's still out there trying to figure some way we can go back in and we're in charge of the war, on Syria. And as that earlier report came out, the French airstrikes are not targeting ISIS. They're targeting stadium, museum, medical clinics. When you hear about how Russia and the West are coordinating airstrikes in Syria, it seems to break down that Russia is actually going to be bombing ISIS and the West is going to bomb everything else. And yes, we should feel sorry for the Syrian people who are having to deal with this. But no, we should not allow our country to be flooded with Syrian refugees or illegal immigrants. The way to solve the refugee crisis is to stop these U.S. wars of conquest that are making all these people refugees. That's the solution. Now, interestingly enough, a United States Senator for the state of Virginia, Richard Black, and we're trying to get him on the show already, wrote a letter to President Bashar al-Assad acknowledging the United States war on Syria is an unlawful war of aggression. And that's exactly what it is. It's a continuation of that grand plan revealed by General Wesley Clark all the way back in 2003. There was a plan to conquer all the resource-rich areas of the Middle East, ending with Iran. It was supposed to be over in 2008. Obviously, they're a little off the timeline on the plan. Now, Russia's warplanes in Syria, we had a caller mention this. ISIS, for the most part, is already heading for the border. And Russia's warplanes are hunting down their convoys and blowing them up. The Russian foreign minister is out there with a statement saying that the U.S. intentionally spare ISIS in Syria because they want ISIS to weaken Assad, leading to his removal. Yes, we already know that. But it's nice to get more confirmation. It's nice to finally realize that some of these top-level power players do, in fact, understand exactly the game the U.S. has been playing. Now, yesterday we were talking about how Turkey and the United States had launched a joint military operation to secure the Syria-Turkey border. And I questioned it by saying that doesn't sound like that's an operation against ISIS. And as it turns out, it isn't. We're looking at this article coming out of Activist Post saying that basically what the U.S. and Turkey are trying to do is create a safe zone for ISIS to retreat to and tell Russia, no, we're in control of that area. You're not allowed to go bomb in there. That's what they're trying to do. Now, over in Chechnya, there's a report that some of their jihadists have left Syria in order to fight for Ukraine against Russia. Remember, we had that official in Kiev came out and said, ISIS is our allies against Russia. Anyway. Now, NATO has announced they're going to have a simulated troop deployment of their Allied Rapid Reaction Corps near the Russian borders. We're going to go in and pretend like we're setting up for an invasion. And actually, Goncharov is out there saying this appears to be setting the stage for NATO to reconquer the Donbass by force. We are so dangerously close to a new world war. And over and above my concern that wars are bad things, that only the political leaders and the bankers actually win these things, and ordinary people on both sides suffer for it. But I have an overriding concern that the United States is going to lose this one, big time. The victim of their own arrogance and the excesses of the military-industrial complex. And I greatly fear that we, the American people, are just going to have to grit our teeth and go through what the people of Germany went through when their country lost big mistake number 2. And it's going to get very, very ugly if it doesn't go nuclear. You know, it's an interesting story. Everybody's screaming about the backfire bombers that Russia is sending down to double the airstrikes against ISIS in Syria. Because of the fall of the Soviet Union, these aircraft have been in cold storage for a long, long time. And they actually have less airframe hours on them than the B-1B Lancers, which have been flying continuously. And remember, military aircraft are not built like passenger jets to give years and years of constant in-the-air service. In order to save weight, make them more maneuverable, make them more deadly, the frames are a little more delicate. And the life expectancy of a warplane is measured basically in a few thousand hours before it's really worn out. And so these backfires they're almost showroom new compared to the B-1B Lancers. Okay, apparently over in Western Iran, they have busted a terror cell linked to ISIS. They're not sure what the terror cell was planning on doing, whether it was in Iran or Iraq. I'm waiting for one of these captured ISIS people to say, yeah, we're being paid. Actually, what am I saying? They've already admitted it. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here and getting on back to the news here. It's a very confusing time. There's so many conflicting situations going on. And again, we're dealing with these two competing agendas, one of which is trying to say that because of the Syrian passport found in France, we have to go bomb Syria, which is what they're doing. They're acting on that. And contrast that with the agenda to blend all the world's population together, saying, well, that Syrian passport was a fake, so you shouldn't object to the Syrian refugees coming into your country. Even though, obviously, the terrorists were using Syrian passports to cross borders. And the corporate media is not without embarrassment. Apparently, over in Spain, Spanish state broadcaster TVE was doing a show about terrorism, and they put up what they thought was an Al-Qaeda logo. And it turned out to actually be the logo from the Star Wars movies for the Rebel Alliance, and they've issued a formal apology on that one. Top of the show, we were talking about this video going around about how Muslims are celebrating the attacks on Paris, and that turned out to be an old piece of footage from 2009, celebrating victory in a cricket match. But when the corporate media is out there, when the propagandists are out there trying to sell you these lies, they'll grab anything they can, and they don't seem to understand. When they use a fake photo, you can use Google's image search to find where it originally came from very quickly. You can't lie to the world the way you could back in 1950s, 1960s. In the age of the Internet, it is impossible, and that's why they're trying to find some way to shut the Internet down. Because if they can't lie to you, they can't control you. And if they can't control you, they get really upset. They start crying and saying, I'm supposed to be the boss. Up in Ukraine, apparently fire from Kiev forces, mortar fire, hit this village of Spartak and set fire to a residential building, not a military target. Russia has decided the time has come to impose a food embargo against Ukraine. Even with all of this, hate Russia coming out of Kiev, Russia has allowed food trade to continue. And basically, Russia's had enough. Ukraine is still refusing to pay their gas bill. They're still insisting Russia give them free gas. All of this is very unrealistic. Russia's been very, very patient. And now they're going to start putting their foot down here. Now, over at the United Nations, there was a resolution in support of the IAEA and its work, and Russia opposed this resolution because in this resolution, it declares a nuclear facility in Crimea as belonging to Ukraine. And Russia came out and said when there was the illegal coup d'etat in Kiev in early 2014, which we all know about, the people of Crimea held a referendum to separate from Ukraine. And at that point, this facility should have been described as Crimean, not Ukrainian. And then the people of Crimea had another referendum to merge with Russia, at which point this facility should be considered Russian. But the United Nations is still taking the position that Crimea is supposed to belong to Ukraine, and Russia is justifiably upset about it. Now, if the UN is really being objective and impartial in weighing the agendas of its various member nations, it's a one-sentence fix. We'll see if they do it. Now, the United Nations has done something that's really very good, and I'm going to have to thumbs up on this one. The United Nations has issued a demand to Israel annulling Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. And, of course, Israel is not going to want to do that now that all of that huge resource of oil was found under it. Israel covets that. And what Israel wants, Israel's going to get. Now, the European Union refuses to recognize Israel's annexation of these territories. The United States refuses to recognize it. Now the United Nations has chimed in. They refuse. So I guess we can expect ISIS to attack the United Nations now, because bad things happen to people who don't do what Israel tells them to do. Netanyahu, apparently in a knee-jerk response, is now dropping hints that he's going to annex the West Bank. This according to an article over in the Times of Israel, trying once again to prove that Israel, or at least Israel's government, is above such things as international law and human rights and various treaties in the UN Charter. Now, as you know, Spain just issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and many of his top officials over the attack on the humanitarian aid flotilla in international waters, which killed 8 people, one of them an American citizen. And these are international arrest warrants. And there's more than a few countries are saying they will honor them. South Africa is one of them. If any of these officials, if Netanyahu sets foot into Spain or South Africa, they'll be arrested, sent to The Hague. Or sent to Spain, actually. So we can expect ISIS terrorist attacks in Spain and South Africa now, because that's the way it works. Over in Gaza and the West Bank, Palestinians are being terrorized by what Israel's government calls Jewish extremists, except these extremists carrying out these attacks, these arson attacks and so forth, are always being protected by the IDF. Now, there's another article came out of Electronic Intifada, once again reminding us how America's media is very biased when it comes to Israel and Palestine. Anytime there's an Israeli that is wounded or injured, it is given front page coverage, and oh, what a horrible tragedy, this shouldn't be happening. When the Israelis are committing acts of brutality against the Palestinians, it's relegated to the back page and treated as, well, you know, dog got run over by a car or something. It's not important. Don't think about it. And this bias is now obvious to everybody. It's kind of interesting. They're talking about bringing a law to make independent media fair and balanced, the equal opportunity or the fair opportunity situation. But the corporate media hasn't been following that for years. And now they want to say, we need fair and balanced reporting on the independent media. Well, we'll go along with that as soon as the corporate media is held to the same standard, because they're not there. They're definitely not there. Israel has approved another 454 settlement homes in East Jerusalem, which under United Nations resolutions and treaties is not part of Israel. Israel just keeps on building, hoping to make a reality on the ground and saying, well, we can't give it back now. Look at all these people living there. That would be unfair to these people to make them give up their homes and move back. Well, it was unfair to the people you took the homes away from, wasn't it? Oh, well, they don't count. And if you think the Palestinians count, you're just a filthy Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the oven twice. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over in Romania, probably haven't been paying attention over there, but as you probably remember, back on November 4th, Romania's Social Democratic Prime Minister Victor Ponta resigned following right-wing demonstrations and disruptions against his government. Now, the protests were sparked by this deadly nightclub fire in Bucharest, and was organized by media outlets and non-governmental organizations with links to various European interests. We've seen this pattern before, and so it's not surprising that a pro-European Union technocratic government has just been put into power in Romania. It's another one of these overthrow of an elected government and replacement with a puppet ruler. So we can add that to the list of how many times this has been done, and apparently, at least at this moment, it is a success. But then that's what they were saying about Yemen not too long ago. There's an article over at Rents.com, Approaching Global Insanity, and it does feel like that. It does feel like all of our political leaders are just losing their minds. And it will lead to a nuclear war. And the nuclear war will go it's going to have to go nuclear. This next world war, they cannot help but go nuclear. Because the United States and its allies are militarily exhausted from over 10 years of constant invasions and reinvasions and reinvasions of all these countries who refuse to accept being conquered. The European economy is hovering at the edge of collapse, so is the American economy. And if we get into this full-on war with Russia and China, there's going to come a day when our leaders are finally going to accept it cannot be won using conventional means. And at that point, they're going to start turning those little brass keys in the missile silos. And we know they're already planning to do that. They've been upgrading this big nuclear gravity bomb. Used to be a dumb bomb, now it has a smart tail assembly to make it more accurate. They're already preparing to wage a nuclear war. They're going to incinerate the surface of planet Earth in this argument over whose brand of ink and paper we're all supposed to use for the next 100 years. Which is a good segue into the economic news here. Apparently over in California, which has gone regulation and tax happy beyond belief, in the last 7 years they've lost 9,000 companies. Some of them simply keep their offices in California, but they've moved their operations to other states with more favorable business climates. Others have simply left completely. Governor Jerry Brown's office continues to deny that business departures are a serious issue for the California tax base. We can afford to lose 9,000 companies and welcome in another 1 million illegal immigrants to use up the social services and available resources. Are all these people on prescription antidepressants? Because they're not really making much of any sense. The Baltic Dry Index crashes near a record low, and as you know, that's an early indicator of manufacturing activity. The Baltic Dry Index is a measure of how much raw materials are being shipped from the mines, the producers, to the factories to make them into products. And when the Baltic Dry Index is very low, it means factories are not getting orders. And they're not manufacturing. Now, there's an article over in Blacklisted News. Read the one paragraph that explains why no bankers have gone to jail. And they're talking about a recent change, okay, to the Yates memo. This is a document written by Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates regarding corporate wrongdoing. And the change is in the U.S. Attorney's Manual. It used to say, quote, in preserving the integrity of markets and protecting consumers and investors, federal prosecutors and corporate leaders typically share common goals. Let me hit that last one again. Federal prosecutors and corporate leaders typically share common goals. They're working together to keep Wall Street propped up. That's why none of the bankers ever get prosecuted or sent to jail. It's all one big team. Make Wall Street look good. That's what we're here to do. Yes, we're going to use corruption and cheating, and the prosecutor's going to say, go ahead and do it, as long as it makes the market look good. Now, they have changed that statement in the U.S. Attorney General's Manual to saying, quote, one of the most effective ways to combat misconduct is by holding accountable all individuals who engage in wrongdoing, which is the way it should have been all along. That's certainly what Iceland did. And everybody's been wondering, if it worked for Iceland, why aren't we doing it here? Well, maybe as a result of that change, we're hearing noises about how the United States government is considering bringing criminal charges against J.P. Morgan, Royal Bank of Scotland executives. Of course, it sounds good. It's certainly what the people want going into an election year. Personally, knowing this government, I won't believe it until these bankers are actually behind bars. But supposedly there are prosecutions being prepared for all of these banks engaging in the shoddy mortgages, the mortgage-backed security fraud followed by the foreclosure fraud. And yes, they should be in prison as a deterrent to future money junkies crossing that line. But again, it may just be election season propaganda. Yes, we're working to bring Wall Street under control, and then nothing ever really gets done. So until I actually see bankers, and I'm not just talking about, the one who crossed the line like Bernie Madoff. I'm talking about hundreds going to prison. I'm not buying this one tiny bit. Over in Greece, major protests by farmers because of overtaxation, austerity. The farmers are throwing oranges. The police are throwing tear gas grenades. That's what's going on over there. Article out of RINF.com taking Aiea to task because Ikea's official position is neutrality on the issue of unionization. However, for the last 18 months, employees at several Aiea stores in the United States have been attempting to form a union with the United Food and Commercial Workers, and Aiea management has taken several steps to try and block that, despite their official stated policy of being neutral on unionization. So we have these corporate executives saying one thing and doing something else. Oh my goodness, what a shock. How will I ever deal with it? All right, our GOP candidates are now down to 13. Bobby Jindal has suspended his presidential campaign. Trump's poll numbers are soaring following the Paris attack, underscoring the fact that he was very right about the open border issue. Trump commands a 19-point lead over his nearest competitor, according to the Monday Consult survey. He's doing extraordinarily well. Now, interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders is taking his shots at Hillary Clinton's foreign policy experience, and he is rightly pointing out where she has failed, and he should be. And this article that we saw over here in RINF.com is saying if it was not for Bernie Sanders, Hillary could make up anything at all. Claims about her foreign policy experience, and nobody would question it. Certainly nobody in the corporate media. They all love her. The only one out there holding her to task for her misstatements is Bernie Sanders. So, anyway, we're coming up here. I got enough time here. Hillary Clinton's latest here. She's going after comedians for making fun of her, saying, you shouldn't do that. I'm a woman. It's not politically correct. I'm a candidate. I'm going to be the next president. You better lay off of me. So, she's got to be feeling the pressure if she's going after comedians. I mean, that's always been kind of hands-off. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, getting on over to Hillary Clinton. As you know, a lot of attention focused on the Clinton Foundation. Legally allowed to accept money from foreign sources, and much of the money they have received has been from foreign sources, followed by favorable treatment by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton at the State Department. Larry Klayman, founder of Judicial Watch, built a strong RICO lawsuit against the Clinton Foundation. Unfortunately, he got a judge appointed by Bill Clinton. The judge refused to recuse himself over the obvious conflict of interest and promptly tossed the case out of court. Such is corruption in modern-day America. Now, the Clinton Foundation came under criticism because apparently they filed incomplete tax returns for a few years. Didn't happen to mention some of the donations coming on in. They got called on it. At first they said, we're not going to refile the tax returns. We'll just go ahead and pay the penalties and everything, and nobody will talk about it. Then they came around and they refiled the taxes, and they got a clean bill of health from what we were told was a third-party expert who reviewed the Clinton Foundation's tax forms. It turns out the third party isn't so disinterested. DLA Piper, the firm that reviewed the Clinton Foundation's taxes, happens to be a Clinton Foundation donor. Now then. Hillary Clinton was down at an event in Dallas, Texas. There was a man in the audience holding up a very small sign saying, yes, Mrs. Clinton, it does make a difference. A reference to her comment regarding the attack on the consulate at Benghazi. You know, was it because of a protest or guys out for a walk? And at this point, what difference does it make, Senator? And this guy held up a sign. Yeah, it does make a difference. And he was escorted out of the event by Hillary's people. So much for the First Amendment. So, let's see. Let's talk about immigration, because that's a hot button issue. The people who've been pushing for open borders or no borders and blurring us all together, they're in a real pickle over the initial allegation that the Paris terror attack was carried out by ISIS from Syria because of that passport. And now they're out there saying, well, the Syrian passports were fake. All of the suspects were European passports. But they're still going to go ahead and bomb the heck out of Syria. Doesn't make any sense, but if you're a loyal, patriotic citizen, you will believe the bovine excrement, or the terrorists will win. So we're seeing all these articles saying, there are so many Syrian refugees, and only a few of them are going to be terrorists, but you know something, it only takes one. If you really think about it. If the terrorists or the terrorist actors are using Syrian passports to get across borders, let's shut the borders. Common sense. We're not being heartless. We are taking care of our own. According to an article over in LiveLeak, the Syrian ambassador is saying that 20% of the refugees going into the European Union have ties to ISIS. Now, in early September, an unnamed ISIS operative apparently confirmed an estimated 4,000 covert ISIS terrorists had arrived in Europe disguised as refugees. Remember all these articles about how all these Syrian refugees were young men of military age. No, hardly any women, hardly any children, hardly any old people. These were all potential soldiers. And we need to remember, it doesn't matter who the attackers in Paris were. If they're using Syrian passports to cross borders, that's a problem right there. Now, there's an article over in the Realist Report about this Jewish professor, Brynan, who is out there saying that the West must continue to accept all the refugees despite the threat of terror, despite the increasing crime and rape, and yes, even at the displacement of white people. That's it. Push the agenda. Push the agenda. Why does he really care? Mostly because much of the lands being emptied of their population by these U.S. wars are coveted by Eretz Israel, the Greater Israel Project. They want those lands depopulated so they can just go on in and say, oop, part of Israel now. From the Nile to the Euphrates, according to the Bible. And by the way, for those of you not familiar with this, if you look at the flag of Israel, which is based on a special cloth used in the Jewish faith. I forget the name of it. The two blue lines at top and bottom, those are the rivers, the Nile and the Euphrates, the eventual promised land of Israel from the Old Testament. Now, Donald Trump is pointing out that Obama is sending all of these refugees coming in, and also we need to add the illegal immigrants to primarily Republican strongholds. And Obama is out there chastising these Republican governors. How could you be so heartless as to not let these people in? Well, Donald Trump is once again revealing his political naivete. He's missing the big picture. Because even though the illegal immigrants and the refugees are not legally allowed to vote, all of these people will vote in next year's elections anywhere that proof of citizenship is not required, which is most. It's politically incorrect to check if somebody is a citizen before you let them vote. And of course, all these refugees and illegal immigrants, out of gratitude to the Democratic president who let them into the United States, they're all going to vote Democrat, meaning they'll be voting for Hillary. Obama is flooding this country with people who are not legally supposed to be here, not supposed to vote, because he wants to swing the election to Hillary. In fact, Obama's gone so far as to accuse Republicans who are opposed to allowing the refugees in as actually providing ISIS with a potent recruiting tool. Oh, see, you're helping the terrorists if you don't let the refugees in here. That's how desperate he is to do this. He knows that in an election carried out by legal American citizens with a right to vote, Hillary will not be able to win. especially if the GOP nominee does wind up being Donald Trump, which certainly seems to be the case now, barring a tragic accident in a small aircraft. And so Obama is literally flooding the country with instant Democrats. And I can guarantee you right now, those few places in the United States that still require proof of citizenship to vote are going to come under attack in the next year. They're going to give away the right to vote, which is the property of the American citizen, to everybody coming across the border. Bread and circuses time. Vote Democratic, we'll take stuff away from the legal citizens and give it to the illegal citizens. Now, the FBI is wagging the terror about the coming holidays. We have Thanksgiving coming up in another week, Macy's Parade, football games. We have Christmas after that, New Year's after that. Very tempting, inviting targets. And at this point, it doesn't look like they're going to take a pause on all these false flags. We're certainly seeing this drumbeat about ISIS, 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 ISIS. And again, we have no idea who actually did the Paris attack. Clean-shaven white guys. That's what the witnesses said. Military bearing, military-class weapons. Nation-state logistical support. And they're in this awkward position. We're supposed to blame ISIS in Syria, but we're not supposed to blame the Syrians. Because we want to bomb Syria, but you got to take the Syrian refugees. Now, the majority of America's governors, including a Democrat, are saying they will refuse to allow Syrian refugees into their countries. The federal government maintains state governors do not have the authority to deny refugees going into their state if His Highnessness Lord Obama declare it so. Congress can stop Obama from doing this. I don't think Congress will. I think the governors of these states ought to call up the National Guard and put them at the points of entry and turn back the illegals and the refugees. And if Washington, D.C. sends in the army, that will really wake up the American people as to how rogue Washington, D.C. has gone. And it may already be getting ready to happen. Tennessee GOP leader, round up the refugees and kick them out of the state. He's taught Tennessee Republican lawmakers, saying the time has come for the National Guard to collect them all up and kick them out. We'll be back after top of the hour news and commercials. Aloha America, aloha Scotland, aloha the world. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Did you catch on the news break? Now they're saying maybe they didn't get the mastermind at that raid in Paris this morning. You know, they fired 5,000 rounds. They didn't hit him. I thought the French were better sharpshooters than that, to be very, very honest. Or maybe they didn't want to hit anybody. By the way, apparently this raid happened, very early hours. And they're claiming this woman blew herself up with a suicide vest. Do they wear those things to bed? Anyway. Back on to more of these stories here. Sputnik News is reporting British public support for refugees wanes as the first Syrians reach Scotland. And it's interesting because this article in Sputnik starts out talking about the picture of the lifeless toddler washed up on the Turkish beach, fully clothed, his shoes still on, and what a shocking picture it was, and built immediate sympathy for all these poor refugees trying to get out of all the countries the U.S. is engaged in wars of conquest against. Except, of course, the picture turned out to be staged. They'd found the body somewhere else, and they positioned it on the beach for maximum dramatic impact. And then, of course, it turned out the little boy wasn't even a refugee. He was the son of the captain of the smuggler boat. But again, anything that builds support for the agenda is good. What's going on here? All right. Story coming out of Breitbart. More than 90% of Middle Eastern refugees are on food stamps. 70% are receiving direct cash assistance according to government data. But Social Security, which we've all paid into, is now broke, and we're being told to prepare for its end. simply kissing off all the money that we paid in during our working lives. It's gone poof. And of course, they're cutting the budget to the Veterans Administration. Just don't have any money to take care of all those kids who got crippled in these wars of conquest. But we've got plenty of money to move in and support the Syrian refugees or the illegal immigrants. Plenty of cash for them. Because they're all going to be instant Democrats and they'll vote next year for Hillary Rodham Clinton. We've been talking about this epidemic of political correctness that is being imposed on college campuses all across the country. It's an attack on freedom of speech. It's an attack on the First Amendment. We've actually had some of these so-called activists come on out and literally say the First Amendment creates a hostile environment. It should be banned. We don't want freedom of speech for you. Obviously, we get our freedom of speech. We get to say whatever we want about white privilege and transgender restrooms and the rest of it. You're not allowed to argue back because I feel threatened. My feelings are hurt. I'm feeling hostility from you. You know, if you're going to have freedom of speech and you're going to get into a debate with somebody who's got an opposing point of view, there's going to be a little trace of hostility. You hold it under control in the spirit of decorum, but it's going to be there. Article coming out of The Intercept. The greatest threat to campus free speech is coming from Dianne Feinstein and her military contractor husband, who are very much involved with the University of California, where they are literally trying to code it into the rules of the college system, if not state law, to permanently make it illegal to criticize the government of Israel. They're pushing for this all across the country. Israel hates freedom of speech. Israel hates freedom of thought. Israel wants a world in which you will believe what you are told to believe by Israel. Or you will go to jail, like that 87-year-old grandmother over in Germany just did. You will believe what we tell you to believe, or the terrorists will win. Now, we're seeing, as part of this globalist agenda, to merge all of humanity into a single population with no clear idea of who they are, where they came from, what their background is, to make us pliant, obedient workers for the rise of the new feudalism. And apparently over at the University of Vermont, and I'm surprised, being a New Englander myself, I thought the Vermonters had a little more common sense. The University of Vermont is holding a privilege retreat for students who self-identify as white in order to confront their white privilege. It's basically brainwashing white people to feel guilty over the fact that they're white. That's it. I don't feel guilty over my being who I am. Wasn't my fault. I inherited it with my DNA. And I'm not feeling one bit guilty about it. They're trying to make these people feel ashamed for how they were born. Isn't that racist at its very core? To make somebody feel inferior on the basis of their skin color? This isn't equality they're pushing, it's reverse discrimination. All these Black Lives Matter activists are not interested in a society free of racism. They want the racism going their way. Now, we have been seeing all of these attacks on our cultural identity, our historical identity, and the latest insult is coming from Princeton University. Students have taken over the president's office demanding the erasure of President Woodrow Wilson because he was a racist, and they demand all the buildings currently honoring him be immediately renamed. Now, I've got a bone to pick with Woodrow Wilson. He was the one who sold us back into the slavery of private central banking. But I notice these Black Lives Matter people don't seem to care about that one tiny bit. It's absurd. We posted a video to WhatReallyHappened.com, to the front page. We posted it a while back, but it was worth a repeat. The video is titled Modern Education, spelled EDUCAYSHUN. It is hilarious to watch, or it would be if it wasn't so close to the truth of what's going on in our classrooms right now. And you should look at it. You'll get a laugh out of it, but you'll realize The American public education system is not about education, and it hasn't been for quite some time. It's about indoctrination. Getting the kids to believe in certain things with which to enslave them, because that's what belief systems are all about, enslavement. To get you to act as if something was true, even if it's complete and utter nonsense. Anyway. Article coming out of Blacklisted News. Most police training is simply learning to kill. It's leading to a deadly epidemic. The Free Thought Project has been covering the murder of 19-year-old Zachary Hammond by Officer Mark Tiller back on July 26th. The dash cam video was finally released only 3 weeks ago, showing literally a maniacal police officer ruthlessly take the life of this teenager over a suspected bag of marijuana. And this campus cop shot this kid multiple times, including 2 shots to the head. The cop claimed the student was trying to run him over. And they refused to release the video because once the video was finally released, it showed absolutely not. The cop just walked up, screamed at him, drew his gun, and executed him in cold blood on the spot. And it's becoming a very common story all across the country. Now, there was this other story that came out of Raw Story. And it's talking about this 18-year-old girl, Gabby Lemos, was assaulted by a police officer after celebrating her graduation from high school at her home. And they'd had a party, and the party was over. Deputy Marcus Holton and 6 other officers. I got to take a break for commercials. We'll come to this when we come on back. This is disgusting. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this latest incident of police brutality and oppression against the American people. 18-year-old Gabby Lemos, obviously earlier this year, graduated high school, had a graduation party at her home. The party was winding down. And Deputy Marcus Holton and 6 other officers with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department showed up uninvited, without probable cause, and began interrogating the people standing outside the house. Now, Gabby's sister, Carly, was sitting in a parked car outside with her boyfriend, probably doing what young people like to do when they're parked in a car. And Holton began to question them. At one point, he opened Carly's door and attempted to physically pull her out of the vehicle. Gabby's mother rushed on outside, said, "Everybody go in the house." And apparently at that point, Holton bolted around the family and without a word caught Gabby from behind the neck in a chokehold, lifting her up several feet off the ground and then slamming her face first onto the driveway. Now, the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department initially said that the officer's body camera showed he behaved with restraint and professionalism during a highly volatile situation. When the body camera footage was finally pried loose, it demonstrated clearly Gabby was not resisting. She did not attack Holton in any way, which he'd claimed. So they dropped the charges against her. The Lemos family then filed a lawsuit for assault, and at which point the district attorney responded by filing new charges against Gabby for obstructing, restricting, or delaying a peace office, because under California law, if you are found guilty of resisting arrest, you are banned from filing a lawsuit against the arresting officer. And that's the reason for the district attorney's move, trying to prevent the lawsuit from going forward. And if Gabby is found guilty on this charge, she will go to prison for a year. It's one more reminder that the justice system is not just. It's out to protect itself and its tools of oppression. And by the way, this Sheriff Holton shot and killed a man in 2011, was cleared of any wrongdoing because he claimed the victim was reaching for his waistband. If your pants are falling down in California and you grab them to hitch them up, the police can legally shoot you dead. That's where we're going. My understanding is the California police have decided to change their official motto from "to protect and to serve" to "we treat you like a king." Rodney King. It is out of control. The police are not about law enforcement or keeping the peace. It's about keeping the American people terrified and oppressed. That's what the police are doing. They're a force for repression. Yesterday we reported it. It's worth repeating today. Civil asset forfeiture losses by the American people exceeded all burglaries in 2014. The police are stealing more from the American people than the criminals are. What does that tell you about the nature of our government? All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call. Mark in Texas. Aloha, Mark in Texas. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, hi, Mike. I wanted to talk first about the governors, but now that you got me started with the police, I think it's time we start to take some of the authority away from police in this country. For one thing, why are they off duty? Why should they have any kind of authority off duty? It goes against the Constitution of equality under the law. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think we should rely a lot more on volunteers to police ourselves and to, than to have so-called professional police force. They should basically,
especially when they're being incentivized to steal from the public, either through excessive traffic tickets or civil forfeiture. Now, I understand that a law enforcement officer who is off duty, if they see a criminal situation, they have the option to intervene, and probably they should. What we need to remember, though, is the United States Supreme Court has ruled that police officers are protected by the law only when they themselves are compliant with the law and the Constitution. If the police exceed their legal authority, if they themselves are breaking the law, ordinary citizens have a legal right to resist up to and including the use of lethal force.
But there is a problem with that. First of all, I think they shouldn't have any more authority than any other armed citizen. If a citizen has a concealed carry permit, he should have the same authority off duty as an off-duty cop. But the other thing is, there is a lot of abuse, for instance, in a traffic, let's say you get into a fender bender. And I know this from experience because when I was in law enforcement, back in New York some years ago, I hate to say a colleague of mine, but another officer, on his way home from the St. Patrick's Day parade, he was dead drunk. He was driving dead drunk. Okay. He got into a fender bender with another guy and shot the guy. Now this guy was very powerful, the guy he shot. The guy still kicked his butt. Okay. But he got off as far as charges of shooting or anything else. And everybody was so happy. Oh, yeah. His name was Patty. I won't give you his last name. But the thing is, that stuff shouldn't happen. You should not have any kind of advantage because you're employed as a law enforcement officer.
You shouldn't, but as that case in Sonoma County points out, the district attorney is not concerned with what's right or wrong, but simply protecting the system from criticism, from lawsuits, and it really is completely out of control. Now, technically, citizens, with or without a concealed carry permit, do have the right of citizen's arrest if they witness a crime. For practical reasons, I don't encourage people to try and do that. But the assumption is that the police officers have had some kind of training, and equipment to deal with these situations. The problem is they're now being trained to treat the American people as if we're all automatically criminals. It's a return to the Code Napoleon. If I think you're guilty, and I'm going to treat you exactly that way.
Yeah, they're not peace officers anymore. They act like an occupying army.
That's exactly what they are. They're war officers.
Okay. And the other thing I wanted to say about was, with these governors, what I think these governors should do is they should employ not only the National Guard, citizens posses, whatever else they have, and say, no, you're not coming into the state. Now, the only thing Obama could do is bring in federal troops. And having also been a member of the military one time, I can tell you the troops will not back him up. That'll be it.
I understand that. I understand that. We're coming up on a commercial break. I want to make a point here. There is still in the United States, under U.S. law, the unorganized militia, which is the American people. These are the people who are guaranteed the right to keep and bear arms under that Second Amendment. And I'm sure there's a lot of Americans out there, who are basically saying, I've got nothing left to lose. I might as well stand up to this federal government abuse here, especially with our federal government bringing in criminals, potential terrorists, and highly contagious people just to make them instant Democratic voters, even though they're not legally allowed to vote. We have to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, earlier today, somebody claiming to be ISIS released a photo of a potential bomb used to bring down the Metrojet flight over Egypt. And it was basically a can of Schweppes fizzy water with a couple of wire things next to it. This is how ISIS brought down the Metrojet. The Russian investigators have come on back and saying, this is utter nonsense. And I said the same thing when I saw it. Because even with C4 in that one can, you're not going to get that big a blast. If it's hidden inside the serving cart with the other soft drinks, the explosion is going to be very muted. The shock wave will be blunted, which is the advantage of a C4 type explosive, is it produces a shock wave. And the Russians have come out and said that's nonsense. That amount of TNT or C4 would not have brought down the aircraft. So somebody's still out there playing propaganda games with all this nonsense. Sputnik News is reporting the Italian Prime Minister is out there saying Europe's current anti-Russia policy, actually it's the United States anti-Russia policy, is going to lead nowhere. And he's making a point that the only people who are on board with this new anti-Russia policy are people too young to remember the last Cold War. He's saying older, wiser, more experienced people understand that the old Cold War in the 1950s and 1960s bled the European taxpayer dry and the American taxpayer dry to buy all kinds of new hip weapons, which ultimately were never used, thankfully. Now, Italy is at the forefront of trying to restore normal relations with Russia. So this anti-Russia coalition that the U.S. is trying to build is already fragmenting and coming apart. There's an article over an Investment Watch blog warning to expect more mass shooting false flags next year because of Obama's statement. Gun control will be his top priority next year. Restoring Social Security? Nah, not interested. Bringing back employment? No, not interesting. Okay. Secure our borders? No. Get the guns? Absolutely. We've got to get the guns. Because they're concerned that we, the American people, are not deliriously happy with the way Washington, D.C. is running this place. And they're absolutely right about that. So every time, people start buying more guns, and they're out there buying more guns right now, oh, we've got to find somebody with his brain melted on prescription antidepressants, and we'll give him a gun, and we'll send him into a gun-free zone and tell him it's a giant open-air shooting gallery. And then on the basis of this one crazed individual's actions, they will demand all of us surrender our guns. Which kind of is like saying that every time a drunk driver kills somebody with a car, we're all supposed to turn in our cars and live without those. But only in this one area is the entire public being punished for the crimes of a few individuals. When somebody commits a burglary, you don't lock up the entire village. Somebody commits a murder, you don't execute the entire town or the entire village. That would actually be a war crime. But somebody misuses a gun and immediately they say, oh, everybody turn in your guns. We don't trust you with guns. Which is tantamount to saying we're scared of our own people here. Now, another way that the government is going to try and reduce America's ownership of guns, they're going to put a tax on it. There's a new bill being proposed in Congress that will put a $100 per year tax on every gun that you own. What part of shall not be infringed are these people not getting? All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Joe in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I wanted to follow up on the previous caller that was saying the police are unaccountable for their actions.
Yes.
And I felt that the public sector unions have so much power that they seem to control the politicians in their cities and states, for when they make mistakes, they immediately have the ability to silence anybody who ends up the victim of their unaccountable action.
Well, that's been a problem all along. But the issue used to be that if a police officer actually committed a crime, the unions would back off because it made them look bad. The problem is compounded by the fact that all of the American police departments are being retrained mostly by these Israeli security companies. We're seeing all these stories about how police chiefs all over America are being given free trips to Israel to learn the correct way of managing your dissatisfied population from the IDF. And it is not a coincidence that we're seeing the American police treat the American people the way the IDF treats the Palestinians,
Well,
including extrajudicial execution.
Was Chris Christie referring to the police union as a division of the military? And the New York or New Jersey where those police were caught on their body cams where they shot the person, and instead of calling anybody, they called their union rep.
Yeah, I mean, the unions are part of the problem. They're not the sole cause of it. They're part of the problem. Ultimately, it comes down to the person wearing that uniform and how they really see their role in our society. And there was a time not too long ago where the vast majority of police really believed in the expression to protect and to serve. Today, they're being indoctrinated to view all Americans as a potential threat and to respond that way. Any sudden move is grounds to grab somebody and throw them up against a wall. And it's happening all across the country.
Yes, when they drink the Milgram Kool-Aid and they just go on the authority that the contract says or whatever. I just think that it's sad that the victim turns out to be the taxpayer that's funding the people who are causing the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly true. Ultimately, the taxpayer pays for it all. But if you go back and you study the history of any totalitarian society, part of the process involves turning the domestic police departments into a terrorizing force of oppression. The Nazis did it, Stalin did it, Pol Pot did it, Ceausescu did it. It's part of the pattern as the U.S. sinks into a fascist dictatorship.
And then they try to claim that it's because they're paramilitary, they're a division of the military, when that is ludicrous. Paramilitary simply means that when the boss isn't there, they can delegate the authority down to a lower-ranking person. It doesn't mean that you've joined the military just because you work for the city or the county or the state.
Well, it's not supposed to, but, you know, any loose definition they can use to justify what they're doing. But again, the United States Supreme Court ruled on this issue already. When the police themselves are acting within the letter of the law and the Constitution, we owe them our polite cooperation. When the police are outside the letter of the law and the Constitution, they're just ordinary citizens. Their uniforms and badges notwithstanding. And if they're committing a criminal action, we, the private citizens, have a legal right to resist up to and including the use of force, lethal force.
And what they do is as soon as the police unions get in trouble, they take the taxpayer money and lawyer up to fight the taxpayer who's the victim.
Yeah, exactly. We saw that in Sonoma. You know, when the body cam proved that the sheriff was lying, they dropped all the charges against the girl. The family sued for criminal assault, and immediately the DA files more charges because if she's convicted, not only will she go to jail for a year, but she won't be legally allowed to sue the police department under California law. And that's a tremendous injustice, abuse of power and authority. Anyway, listen, Joe, gotta let you go. We're coming up here on a commercial break. Thank you very much for the phone call. When we come on back here, some science and health news, and the last segment of our program today here on this hump day. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, final segment of our program today. Now, over at Michigan State University, former President Bill Clinton is about to give a speech trying to desperately prop up his wife's chances of the White House. And apparently 85 students are blocking access to the room where he is going to be giving his speech to protest white supremacy and institutionalized racism at Michigan State University. Now, the fact that they are students at the university suggests that maybe the supremacy and institutionalized racism is more in their imagination than the reality. But the group has listed a series of demands. They want the creation of a Department of African American and African Studies, a multicultural center, and a College of Race, Class, and Gender Studies. And I have a question for these people. Just what kind of a job do you think you're going to get with a degree in race, class, and gender studies? And will that job be able to repay those usurious student loans you had to take out to be at that college, to scream about white supremacy and institutionalized racism? They're not really thinking this stuff through, are they? I'm really getting sick and tired of the whiners. The perversity of the universe tends to a maximum. Buy a helmet. Now then, over in a suburb in Houston, the Woodland Acres subdivision of Old River Winfrey, this is northwest of Houston, Texas, have a problem with their city water supply. And we have come to understand that under the current economic conditions, the quality of the water supplied by the water companies is declining rapidly, even as the bills continue to go up and up. But this really takes the cake. People in this subdivision were opening their taps and the water was coming out filled with little tiny worms. Those people who had filters on their taps were opening them up and finding they were clogged and jammed with these worms. Now, J&S Water, which supplies water and sewage services to the city, has taken the position that their water is fine. It has to be problems with the piping in your homes, even though it seems to be hitting all the homes at the same time. They insist they've tested the water time and time again. They're blaming the customer water pipes. But it doesn't add up. Why are the worms showing up in everybody's home at the same time? It's not even logical. It's not even plausible. But that's the sort of treatment you get from corporations under fascism. We're right, you're wrong, it's your fault. Boil the water. The worms will give you protein. Now, Italy's top olive oil companies have come under fire for defrauding customers with inferior oils that are just dyed and artificially thickened. There's a great deal of food fraud going on, even here in the United States of America. And the USDA and the FDA allow them to get away with it because they'll treat the label on the front of the product as a brand name rather than a description of the content. When you go to the market and you buy a can that says tuna across the front, there are 17 different species of fish that are legally allowed to be chopped up and put in that can and sold under the trade name of tuna. Tuna is still one of those 17. But you don't really know what fish is in there because tuna is a branding name. It's no longer a description of what's in there. Same thing with honey. Huge amount of food fraud with honey. Anyway. Let's see. Drug overdoses of prescription medication are killing more people than car crashes or guns. And you're paying big, big money for that one here. The Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, the program that makes the taxpayer pay for vaccine damages rather than the industry itself, has announced a fatality following a Gardasil shot. Joel Gomez received a Merck Gardasil vaccine on June 19th and again on August 19th and died in his sleep the following day. And the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program says, yes, the death was caused, in fact, by receiving the Gardasil vaccine against cervical cancer. Now, it's been a while since I studied anatomy, other than Claire's, but I'm pretty certain boys don't get cervical cancer. So why was he given the shot that killed him? Because it makes money, and that's all that really matters in the United States of America. If you're making money, all other sins are forgiven. Another scandal coming out of Africa. Once again, doctors in Kenya have found sterilization chemicals in the Free United Nations and World Health Organization tetanus vaccines. National Security Study Memorandum 200 appears to still be part of U.S. foreign policy. Now, there's an article over here in the Daily Sheeple. Scientists just created a dangerous new form of SARS. Now, 10 years ago, we had the SARS epidemic. It got headline news around the world, infected 8,000 people, which isn't that many in a global population in the billions. And 800 people succumbed to it, but it got a lot of headlines. Now scientists have created a highly potent hybrid of the virus, which has been dubbed SARS 2.0. The new strain is very similar to SARS, but has been modified to be more contagious for humans. Anybody care to tell me just why they made this thing? What happens if somebody slips and drops a beaker? All right. Now, the National Cancer Institute is mandated under U.S. law to educate Americans about cancer and the latest research efforts. Recently, it's actually officially quietly admitted cancer cells are killed by cannabis. And there's actually a bullet point in the NCI's own website. Cannabis has been shown to kill cancer cells in the laboratory. But of course, you're not allowed to have marijuana. You're not allowed to grow it in your backyard. You will go to the pharmacy and you will get your chemotherapy and your radiation treatment because that's legal. You don't want to break the law just because it might actually cure you. Apparently, trace levels of radioactive cesium-137 traceable to Fukushima are now being detected in Florida citrus fruits. Boy, they've really bollocksed up the planet here in their rampant greed and recklessness here. Okay, now then. Heavy snow and blizzard conditions engulf parts of Colorado and Kansas. Snow cancels Denver flights for the second day in a row. 20 inches of snow reported in Colby, Kansas early this morning. And still they're out there. Human-caused global warming. Really? NOAA is still refusing to share the data and methodology by which they claim that global warming is continuing. And I'm getting all kinds of nasty hate emails from people saying, look, you can't just talk about snow blizzards. And you have to quote the report from NASA and NOAA that says 2015 was the hottest year on record, or 2014. Those reports have already been debunked. It's based on flawed data. There's no reproducibility. At the rate we're going, I'm going to get my wish. They're going to have that climate summit in Paris, and they're going to be snowbound. Wouldn't that just be beautiful to see happen? Russia and the United States have mounted a project down in Antarctica to recover unguarded nuclear materials used for long-duration experiments down there. The fuel for radioactive thermoelectric generators, rather. And apparently they've already recovered 4 RTGs and 4 sources of ionizing radiation, and they have been removed from Antarctica, lest some terrorists like ISIS go all the way down to Antarctica to get them to build a dirty bomb. Sure. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, please make a point of talking to your friends and sharing what you know with them. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.